We continue this series of Dave Salmon, A Man and His Camera, Part 1 Railways, with a selection of photographs that Dave captured in the London area, west of Woking, and at Barry Scrapyard. Photographs taken at Guildford between 1966 to 1967 and on other regions will follow. BR Standard Class 3 MT 82024 moves towards empty coaching stock. It's about to haul from Clapham Yard to Waterloo on the 30th January 1965. All of the steam-hauled coaching stock was serviced at Clapham Yard by a servicing crew. A horde of train spotters greet the arrival of BR Standard Class 5 MT 73113 Lioness as she passes down the main through line with the Waterloo Basingstoke passenger service on the 30th of January 1965. Some of the 9 Elms duties involved the working of empty coaching stock with the locomotive from a previous main line working before returning light engine to 9 Elms for disposal duties. Rebuilt West Country Class 34093 Saunton can be seen here at Clapham Junction performing such a duty on the 30th of January 1965. Note the crowd of spectators waiting on the Windsor line platforms for a special train to pass through. Following a state funeral at St Paul's Cathedral, original Battle of Britain Class 34051 Winston Churchill passes through Clapham Junction with his funeral train, which ran from Waterloo to Blenheim on the 30th of January 1965, hence the crowds of spectators. Alex McClymont and I were at Ascot Station that day to watch the same train pass through. BR Standard 3MT 82029 starts away with a set of empty coaching stock, ECS, from number 40 Road, Clapham Yard, bound for Waterloo, on the 24th of March 1967. The brick building next to the locomotive was the yard foreman's office, and the shunters' cabin was on the second floor of the adjacent building, the toilets etc. being positioned on the ground floor. The shunters' cabin housed a huge cast iron kettle that was always on the boil. As a young fireman in the early 1960s, it was an effort to lift it off the stove even when nearly empty, probably because of the amount of chalk deposits that adhered to the inside of the kettle. A long overbridge with numbered boards denoting each siding number stretched right across Clapham Junction station, which allowed access to all platforms from the central lines on one side, South Western lines in the middle, and the Kensington line at the northern end. Rebuilt West Country Class 34036 Westward Ho, minus her nameplates, stands in number 9 Road inside 9 Elms MPD on the 24th of March 1967. An unidentified West Country Class locomotive in original condition, also minus her nameplates, stands in front of her, plus another Bully Pacific in number 10 Road. All, I suspect, suffered the same fate and were towed away to the scrapyard at Barry in South Wales. An unidentified rebuilt West Country Class locomotive is being turned on the turntable at 9 Elms MPD on the 24th of March 1967. Devoid of her once resplendent West Country nameplates and number plate, she looks a sorry sight to behold, and one wonders how these once magnificent locomotives managed to keep going, considering the dire working conditions and woeful lack of maintenance they received at the end of steam. Spare a thought for the residents of the 2 large blocks of flats behind the turntable. The noise generated from the shed yard was relentless day and night. BR Standard Class 4 MT 75074 stands berthed in 9 Elms MPD on the 24th of March 1967. It looks like a virtually empty 9 Elms depot with only one locomotive under the huge coaling plant on the 24th of March 1967. However, there were other locomotives there on the day in the adjoining shed. BR Standard Class 3 MT 82019 with bunker and cab roof fully loaded with coal is about to leave 9 Elms for a day's work hauling empty coaching stock between Waterloo and Clapham Yard on the 24th of March 1967. In the background, loco junction signal box can be seen, spanning the running lines and controlled all movements in and out of 9 Elms MPD. Beyond it, Battersea Power Station can be seen, with chimneys belching smoke and steam. Rebuilt West Country Class 34040 Crew Kern, minus her nameplates, stands outside the shed of 9 Elms MPD on the 24th of March 1967. The smokebox door is ajar to reveal the vertical smokebox locking bar through which a long bolt with fixing lug, affixed to the inside of the door, would pass. Once turned into the horizontal position, the outer handle of the front of the smokebox door would then be screwed tight to form an airtight seal. Someone has emptied the bunker of coal and dust onto the ground from Ivet Tank 41284, presumably before she goes for scrap. Rebuilt West Country Class 34048 Crediton can just be seen on the left of the photograph. BR Standard Class 4 MT 80143 stands in the foreground of number 14 Road on the 24th of March 1967. Other BR Standard Class locos and a couple of Bully Pacific Class locos reside in other roads outside the shed, most destined for the scrapyard. A rather clean-looking BR Standard Class 4MT 80143 heads light engine bunker first from Waterloo through Vauxhall on the Down Windsor line, with number 52 duty pasted on its discboards. Rebuilt Battle of Britain Class 34059 Sir Archibald Sinclair is about to pass Vauxhall Station with a semi-fast service from Waterloo to Basingstoke. Rebuilt West Country Class 34032 Camelford passes light engine tender first through Vauxhall Station on the Down Main local line on its way to 9 Elms Depot for disposal duties. A member of platform staff passes on the tip from the guard to the driver of the up local passenger service that the train is ready to start. U Class 31639 has just completed the final leg of an RCTS special working from Windsor and Eton Riverside to Waterloo on the 30th of April 1966. BR Standard Class 5 MT 73082 Camelot awaits her next turn of duty at Basingstoke MPD on the 21st of August 1965. A fine array of upper quadrant semaphore signals adorn the gantry of the up lines at the London end of Basingstoke platform on the 21st of August 1965. The signals reading from left to right are as follows: up local to Reading branch starter, up local stop and distant, up local to up through stop and distant, up through to Reading branch starter, up through to up local stop and distant, and finally up through starter and distant. The lines to and from Reading played a vital role in trains coming and going to other regions. Felton-based locomotive Q1 Class 33018 stands in the scrap line at Eastleigh in March 1963, awaiting the cutter's torch. A very clean-looking Q Class 30531 stands berthed at Eastleigh in March 1963. Built at Eastleigh Works in 1938, she was reallocated to various depots during her life, the last being Red Hill, where she was withdrawn from service in July 1964. BR Standard Class 4 MT 75027 stands berthed at Eastleigh. Behind her stands a 204 brake horsepower Drury diesel shunting locomotive. On the adjacent road stands original West Country Class 34042 Dorchester. A1X Class 32678 is also standing in the scrap line at Eastleigh, along with an unidentified M7 class and 9F class 92211. Two Eastleigh-based BR Standard Class 4MT locomotives are berthed on adjacent roads at Eastleigh MPD. 76060 was withdrawn from service on the 5th of December 1965 and 76065 on the 10th of October 1965, both having had approximately 11 years of working life. Ivat Tank 41313 stands outside of Eastleigh MPD waiting for her next turn of duty. She was withdrawn from service on the 24th of October 1965. S15 Class 30842 stands forlorn inside Eastleigh MPD. Built at Eastleigh Works in 1936, she was withdrawn from service on the 5th of September 1965, following a period of 29 years working life. BR Standard Class 4MT 76053 stands outside Eastleigh MPD on the 11th of June 1966. Built at Doncaster in 1955, she was allocated to Red Hill as new and ended up being allocated to Guildford in 1966. She was withdrawn from service on the 29th of January 1967. A very clean-looking USA Class 30073 stands outside of Eastleigh MPD on the 11th of June 1966. Rebuilt Battle of Britain Class 34059 Sir Archibald Sinclair, rebuilt West Country Class 34032 Camelford, and rebuilt Battle of Britain Class 34082 615 Squadron await their fate at Eastleigh MPD on the 11th of June 1966. Two Type 3 Crompton diesel electric locomotives stand nearby. Rebuilt West Country Class 34048 Crediton, minus all of her number and nameplates, stands outside Eastleigh MPD on the 11th of June 1966. A Salisbury-based locomotive, she had been withdrawn from service 3 months earlier and awaits her final journey to the Scrapyard in Newport. An unidentified Ruston and Hornsby diesel shunter stands in the adjacent road outside the shed. USA Class 30069 moves towards the depot exit at Eastleigh on the 11th of June 1966. Two of this class, 30064 and 30072, were utilised as shed pilots in my time at Guildford. 4 examples of this class have been preserved: 30064 on the Bluebell Railway, 30065 and 3070 on the Kent and East Sussex Railway, and 30072 on the Keighley and Worth Valley Railway. Diesel shunter D2085 is about to haul away rebuilt Merchant Navy Class 35011 General Steam Navigation, minus nameplates, BR Standard Class 4MT 76065 and BR Standard Class 4MT 76019 at Eastleigh MPD on the 11th of June 1966. 35011 was saved from the cutter's torch and is currently undergoing restoration. Oddly, she is regarded as the only steam locomotive to bear the word steam in the name. DS70224 is a snowplough that has been constructed using a V-class schools tender and was seen at Eastleigh on the 11th of June 1966. USA Class 30073 waits for the clearance of the ground signal before travelling light engine to Eastleigh MPD for disposal duties on the 11th of June 1966. As train spotters look on, rebuilt West Country Class 34004 Yeovil thunders through Eastleigh with the Waterloo-Bournemouth Express on the 11th of June 1966. The same day, BR Standard Class 4MT 76067 heads a parcel service from Basingstoke. The guards van end of Demu number 1124 can be seen on the up line heading for Alton via Winchester Junction. USA Class 30069 is seen busy shunting in Eastleigh Yard on the 11th of June 1966. The footplate crew of USA Class 30069 take a break from shunting duties on the 11th of June 1966. Viewed from Campbell Road Bridge, rebuilt Battle of Britain Class 34077 603 Squadron, minus her nameplates, passes through Eastleigh with an up boat train from Southampton Old Docks to Waterloo. BR Standard Class 4MT 75070 and U Class 31639 prepare to leave Salisbury on the 20th March 1966 with the final leg of the RCTS Solent Rail Tour to Waterloo via Fareham, Petersfield, Guildford, Cobham, Wimbledon, East Putney and Clapham Junction. The unusual routing was caused by the LSWR main line being prepared for electrification. Whilst participants toured Southampton Old Docks, the stock was placed in the siding by one of the dock's diesel shunters. Whilst at Salisbury, Dave captured this fine shot of original Battle of Britain Class 34079 141 Squadron. As part of the Solent tour involved a visit to Southampton Old Docks, the train was hauled there by BR Standard Class 4MT 75070. A further part of the tour involved a trip to Fawley and return to Southampton Terminus, double-headed by USA Class 30064 and 30073. BR Britannia Class 7P6F 70020 Mercury stops at Fareham after completing the second leg of a Home Counties Railway Society Eastleigh and Southampton special on the 6th of December 1964. BR Britannia 70004 William Shakespeare was originally booked to work this part of the tour but failed with an injector problem. M7 Class Drum and Tank 30050 is seen here at Bournemouth MPD sometime in 1961, as by January 1962 she had been withdrawn from service. With safety valve simmering, original Battle of Britain Class 34066 Spitfire is ready to depart Bournemouth Central with a passenger service to Waterloo on the 25th of July 1966. The driver original Battle of Britain Class 34066 Spitfire opens a regulator and with steam being emitted from a cylinder cocks, the locomotive departs Bournemouth Central. The crew of rebuilt Battle of Britain Class 34090 Sir Eustace Missenden Southern Railway replenish a tender at the water column before leaving Bournemouth Central Station with a semi-fast stopping service for Waterloo on the 25th of July 1966. BR Standard Class 4MT 76013 runs into Bournemouth Central with a rake of empty coaching stock on the 25th of July 1966. After uncoupling from the empty coaching stock at Bournemouth Central, BR Standard Class 4MT 76013 returns light engine to the depot. BR Standard Class 4MT 76057 runs into Bournemouth with a special passenger service on the 25th of July 1966. One of the plate layers in the foreground keeps a watchful eye for passing traffic, as they both perform the annual fish plate lubrication service. This would allow the rails to move either way during expansion and contraction during varying weather conditions. Designed by H. Fowler and built by Robert Stevenson at Hawthorne Limited in 1925, 7F class with chalked on number 53808 stands in the scrap line at Barry with Dave leaning on the buffer beam. Despite its state, this locomotive was saved from the cutter's torch and now resides on the West Somerset and Dorset Railway. Built in 1928, number 1618 was originally destined to be a K-class tank. The Sevenoaks accident in 1927 resulted in the rebuilding of the K-class locomotives, known as the Rivers, to U-class tender engines, in which form they were much more successful, being very useful mixed traffic locos. She worked from Guildford Shed over the North Downs line to Reading and Red Hill before being reallocated to Salisbury in 1945. In 1951 she was moved again to 9 Elms. She then moved to Eastleigh in 1954, Basingstoke in 1961 and then back to Guildford in 1963. Upon withdrawal from Guildford in 1964, she went to Barry Scrapyard in South Wales and was the second of many locomotives to leave the yard for preservation. U-Class 31790 stands on top of a row of condemned locos at Barry. 31790 was built as 1790 in 1917 at Eastleigh Works and was renumbered 31790 in 1949. She ended her life at Guildford, being withdrawn from service on the 9th of May 1965, broken up at Barry the same year. Following withdrawal, 42968 was purchased for scrap. By 1969, all other members of the class had been cut up, and the Stanier Mogul Fund was formed to preserve her as an important example of an earlier Stanier locomotive. She is currently undergoing overhaul at the Severn Valley Railway. S15 class 30825 was built at Eastleigh in 1927 and ran until withdrawn from service in January 1964, where she was sent to Wooden Brothers at Barry for scrap. She stayed there until 1986. In 1994, 30825 was cannibalised by the North Yorkshire Moors and Mid Hants Railway for spares. This included using the frames from 30825 to restore 30841, with the resulting locomotive becoming 30825. The boiler and tender now being used by 30825 were thus donated by 30841. S15 class 30841 was built in 1936 at Eastleigh Works as part of the final batch of S15 locomotives. She was initially allocated to Exmouth Junction Shed, but subsequently joined the majority of S15 locomotives at Feltham in August 1963, from where she was withdrawn in January 1964 and sold to Wooden Brothers for scrap. U-Class 31638 is shown in a terrible state. However, she was one of 2 U-Classes saved and has been placed on the long-term loan to Maunsell Locomotive Society, who also owns 1618, and was their main restoration project for over a decade. Having lost her tender whilst at Barry, a new one has been built, starting from the remains of a snowplough, which in turn had been created using a schools class locomotive tender as its base. Q1 class 33020 rusts away amongst the weeds, waiting for the inevitable on the 13th of August 1966. The Q1s thrived on their intended duties in World War II, during which time the class proved an indispensable addition to the southern locomotive fleet. Unsurprisingly, these sturdy austerity locos all remained in service until the 1960s, long after they were intended for withdrawal. Inroads began in 1963 during the implementation of the BR modernisation plan, which saw the end of steam operations on British railways, the last example of the class being withdrawn in 1966. Only one of the class was saved, 33001, which is currently an exhibit at the National Rail Museum at York. Designed at Derby and built at Crewe Works in May 1954, the unique Class 8 Pacific 71000 Duke of Gloucester was intended to represent the pinnacle of modern British locomotive development. However, number 71000 was unpopular with crews for being a shy steamer, and after only a short working life based at Crewe North MPD, the locomotive was withdrawn from traffic in November 1962 and languished at Crewe for a long period pending a decision on its future. Following the removal of the loco's outside cylinders for display at the Science Museum, London, a bizarre mix-up resulted in the condemned 71000 being sent initially to the wrong scrapyard at Cashmore's in Newport instead of Woodham Brothers in Barry. Had it stayed at Cashmore's, there is no doubt that it would not have survived, but in the event it landed at Woodham Brothers, where its rescue led to one of the most remarkable restorations in the preservation movements. The rank and file of redundant steam locos weren't the only candidates for scrapping. The end is nigh for these two A1A warship Type 4 diesel locomotives, D600 active and D601 Ark Royal, at Woodham Brothers, Barry, on the 16th of November 1968. As a 14-year-old spotter at Reading, I recall seeing both of these locomotives and their warship cousins hurtling through the station with name trains such as the Cornish Riviera Express. Somewhat ironically, the initial fleet of 5 lasted only just 8 years in revenue-earning service. D601 actually spent more time in the scrapyard than it did hauling trains on the main line. Some of the Southern Region's N-class locomotives were known as Woolies, due to the number being assembled at Woolwich Arsenal. Here, number 31874 looks in a sorry state. The loco was based at Exmouth Junction shed for almost all of her working life and is the only survivor of the class. After languishing at Woodham Brothers Yard just short of 10 years, she was finally rescued in March 1974 and restored for use on the Mid-Hants Railway. She now resides on the Swanage Railway and is currently undergoing further restoration. Original Battle of Britain Class 34073-249 Squadron and 34081-92 Squadron wait in line at Woodham Scrapyard. Thankfully, both locomotives didn't meet their end. 34073 is still unrestored, and 34081 is receiving an overhaul at the Nene Valley Railway. Wearing his trademark duffel coat, Dave poses for the camera whilst leaning against GWR 7202 at Barry on the 28th of March 1970. During its life, 7202 ran a total of 641,881 miles and was withdrawn in 1964 and went to Barry Scrapyard to await its fate. In 1973, the Great Western Society purchased the locomotive and was one of the last batch of engines to leave Barry by rail. Once at Didcot, not much more was done, except some preventive maintenance, until a group started to do a cosmetic restoration. The heavy freight group, the Mob, then turned their attention to 7202. The rest, they say, is history. U-Class 31806 awaits her fate on the 13th of August 1966. Eventually purchased for preservation at the Mid-Hants Railway, it left in October 1976. The 85th loco to leave the yard, restoration started in 1979 and the locomotive re-entered service in April 1981. In 2014, U-Class 31806 transferred to Swanage, along with U-31625 and N-31874. The Swanage Railway is very pleased to have the loco as part of its resident fleet. It's efficient, easy to maintain and very popular with the crews. After 38 years service, 5643 was withdrawn in July 1963 and was moved just a matter of yards to Woodham's scrapyard in Barry. The owner, Di Woodham, made the decision to stockpile old locomotives because he was receiving more income from scrapping railway wagons. It was a decision that effectively saved hundreds of steam locomotives from the cutter's torch. 5643 was such an engine and was one of the first to leave Barry scrapyard. This final photo shows an assortment of classes of GWR locomotives at Barry on the 28th of March 1970.